He thought he'd trapped prey, but fate had trapped him instead. When a cowboy's snare caught an Apache woman, mercy replaced violence and enemies became something more. Watch till the end. You won't believe how one storm changed them forever. Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Let's get started. The trap swayed gently with the wind creaking under the weight of the captured figure. The cowboy stood frozen, rain dripping off the brim of his hat, unsure what to do. He had hunted deer, coyotes, and even rustlers, but never had his trap caught something so human, so fierce. Her long black hair clung to her face and her breaths came in short, ragged bursts. The storm clouds rolled above them, thunder cracking like a judge's gavel. For a long moment neither moved, the only sound the patter of rain and her trembling breath. He took a hesitant step forward, his boots sinking into the wet earth. The woman thrashed, her eyes flashing like a cornered wolf's. "Easy," he murmured, raising his hands. "Ain't gonna hurt you." His voice was rough, but there was something softer beneath it, something he hadn't used in years. The Apache woman spat in his direction, shouting something in her tongue that he couldn't understand. Her defiance was fierce, unbroken, even with the rope cutting into her wrists. It made his chest tighten in a way he didn't expect. The net creaked again as he crouched beside her. He saw the blood, thin red lines across her arms where the rope had dug in. "Damn," he muttered, half to himself. "Didn't mean for this." He reached for his knife slowly, making sure she saw it. Her body tensed, ready to fight. "Hold still," he said quietly, his voice steady, almost gentle. The blade sliced through the wet rope, the strands snapping one by one. She dropped to her knees, panting, hands shaking as she rubbed at her wrists. He took a step back, giving her space, unsure if she would run or kill him. For a heartbeat, she just knelt there, breathing hard, her eyes locked on him. Then she rose slowly, her legs unsteady but her spirit unbroken. The cowboy held her gaze, tipping his hat slightly. "Didn't mean to catch you," he said again. She didn't reply, just stared, her chest rising and falling with anger and exhaustion. The rain began to pour harder, soaking them both. Her lips trembled, not from fear but from cold. He saw her shiver, and something in him shifted. A quiet ache of regret he hadn't felt in years. "Come on," he said finally, motioning toward his camp. She didn't move, he sighed. "You'll freeze out here." He turned his back, walking toward the small fire he'd left burning under a rock overhang. He didn't look back, though he listened carefully. After a few seconds, he heard it, the soft crunch of her footsteps behind him. She followed, slow and wary, every muscle ready to flee. He didn't speak, just crouched by the fire, tossing a log into the flames as steam rose from his coat. When she finally stepped into the light, he saw her clearly for the first time. She was young, maybe 20, her face marked by dirt and defiance. A long gash ran down her arm, probably from the trap. He reached for his saddlebag, pulling out a strip of cloth. "Let me see that," he said. She flinched away, her eyes narrowing. He sighed again. "Suit yourself." But after a moment she hesitated, then extended her arm, slowly, distrustfully. He cleaned the wound with water, his hand steady. She winced but didn't pull away. As he wrapped the bandage, he couldn't help studying her face, the scars, the strength, the fire in her eyes. "You got a name?" he asked quietly. She said nothing. "Didn't think so," he muttered. "Guess you'd rather keep it that way." She turned her gaze toward the flames, saying something low in her native tongue. He didn't understand the words, but the tone told him enough. It wasn't thanks, but it wasn't hate either. Somewhere in between, something fragile was beginning to form. He handed her a piece of jerky, watching her hesitate before taking it. Hunger won over pride. She ate in silence, her hands trembling from the cold. The cowboy leaned back against the rock, the firelight flickering across his weathered face. "Didn't figure I'd be sharing supper with an Apache tonight," he said softly, almost to himself. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Outside, the storm howled through the canyons like a restless ghost. Inside the small circle of firelight, it felt like another world, tense, uncertain, but alive. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. They sat in silence, both half-trapped by their own pasts. He wondered who she was running from, why she was out here alone. She wondered if she should have run when she had the chance. But something about the way he looked at her, not with hunger or fear, but with quiet regret, kept her there. When dawn came, pale and gold over the desert hills, he found her still awake, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Storm's past," he said quietly. She nodded but didn't move. In that moment, something changed between them, something unspoken, fragile, and impossible. They were no longer hunter and prey, just two souls who had crossed paths in a world that gave no mercy. He stood adjusting his hat and she rose too, the fire's last embers dying between them. "You're free," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the sunrise, her figure vanishing into the mist. He watched until she disappeared, then whispered into the wind, "Didn't mean to catch you, but maybe I was the one caught." The rain softened to a steady drizzle, drumming against the leaves and the fading fire. The Apache woman sat opposite the cowboy, her dark eyes fixed on him like a hawk judging whether to strike or fly. Her hands still trembled slightly, not from fear but from exhaustion and the sting of freedom after the ropes. He didn't speak for a long while, letting the silence breathe between them. When he finally did, his voice came low, almost apologetic. "Didn't mean to snare you," he said, tossing another branch into the flames. She gave no reply, only a wary glance, as if words were too fragile to trust. He tore a piece of bread and set it near her on the ground, not forcing her to take it. She hesitated, then reached for it slowly. Her fingers brushed his for the briefest instant, and he noticed how cold her skin felt, chilled to the bone by the storm and by fear. As she ate, she didn't look at him. The cowboy leaned back against a rock, pulling his poncho tighter. "You got a camp nearby?" he asked quietly. Still no answer. He exhaled through his nose, the kind of breath that came from years of being alone. "Didn't think so." Lightning cracked in the distance, illuminating the canyon walls for a heartbeat. Her eyes flicked to the sound, then back to the fire. "Why?" she said suddenly, her voice low and accented, but sharp enough to cut through the rain. He looked at her, not understanding at first. "Why you not use me?" she said haltingly, her words uncertain but sincere. He froze, the weight of her question sinking deep. For a long moment he couldn't answer. Then he sighed and looked into the fire. "Because I ain't that kind of man," he said softly. Her gaze lingered on him, searching his face for deceit. But all she found was a man tired of violence. The cowboy rubbed the back of his neck. "Lost my wife to fever 5 winters ago," he murmured, half to himself. "Since then, been hunting for things that don't fill a man up no more." She tilted her head, not understanding all his words but feeling the grief beneath them. Something in her expression softened. Not forgiveness, not trust, but the faintest recognition of pain she too had known. The fire flickered lower. He stood and threw another log on it. "You should rest," he said, gesturing to the dry patch beside the flames. "Ain't no danger here." She hesitated, still wary, then nodded slightly. The cowboy turned his back, giving her space, and sat under the edge of his tarp. The night stretched long and quiet. Coyotes howled in the far distance, their cries carried by the wind. Somewhere in the middle of that silence, she whispered something in her language, a word that sounded like "thank you." He didn't understand, but somehow he knew. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the earth glistening and new. The cowboy stirred the ashes with a stick, his breath fogging in the cool dawn air. The Apache woman was awake too, her eyes on the horizon, her face calm but unreadable. "You can go," he said softly. "Ain't gonna stop you." She looked at him, then at the small pouch of food he'd left near her side. "You good man?" she asked quietly. He chuckled under his breath. "Not sure I'd go that far." She stood slowly, adjusting the torn fabric of her dress. Her arm was still wrapped in his bandage. He noticed she hadn't taken it off. She looked down at him once more, her gaze heavy with something unspoken and perhaps confusion, perhaps gratitude, perhaps both. "Maybe," she said, her accent shaping the word into something almost sacred. Then she turned and began walking toward the rising sun, her figure fading into the mist of the desert. The cowboy watched her go, silent. When she disappeared beyond the ridge, he felt a strange emptiness settle in his chest. Not regret, and something deeper. He sat for a while, staring at the tracks she left behind. Each print was light, deliberate, fading quickly with the drying mud. Finally, he stood, saddled his horse, and started to ride in the opposite direction. But halfway down the canyon, he found himself turning his head back toward where she'd gone. For the rest of that day, her image stayed with him, the way she'd stared him down, the way her voice trembled between fear and pride. It was something he couldn't shake. That night, when he made camp again miles away, He took out the small charm she'd dropped near the fire, a necklace of bone and leather. He didn't know what it meant, but he tied it to his saddle anyway, a reminder that mercy sometimes catches a man harder than guilt ever could. Weeks later, the cowboy rode into a small frontier town. As he hitched his horse, he noticed a figure by the well, a woman filling a jug, her dark hair braided, her posture strong and sure. For a heartbeat, he thought it was her, the same presence, the same quiet fire, but when she turned, it wasn't. Still, something about that moment made him smile. He tipped his hat to her, then rode on. The desert wind carried the faint scent of rain, and for the first time in a long while, he felt peace. In the vast silence of the Wild West, where cruelty was common and kindness rare, two enemies had shared a fire, a meal, and something far more dangerous, understanding. The cowboy would go on hunting and wandering, and she would return to her people, forever changed by a night she never meant to spend in a white man's camp. And though their paths never crossed again, both would remember the storm that bound them, a storm that began with a snare and ended with mercy.